Good evening and welcome to Wildlife from the Wildlife Trust, when tonight we're going to be asking the question, can community food growing change the world? Do tell us where you're joining us from. Put in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm a geographer, first and foremost, in my training. So, I love to know where people are joining us from. And people do join us from all over the world for these Wildlife Trust Wild Lives. Tonight, we are asking that question about community food growing, and partly it's to mark the fact that it was 2 years ago that the Wildlife Trust entered a partnership with 3 other brilliant organisations, Incredible Edible, the Women's Institute and Garden Organic, around something called Coronation Gardens. This was a 2-year programme that started to mark King Charles's coronation and his passion both for food and nature, and particularly how people can grow their own food. And over the last couple of years, Coronation Gardens has stimulated people right across the UK to grow their own food and garden in a way that's for food and for nature. This has been an incredible partnership that we've been really, really proud of. And to mark, as that moves into this new phase, we have just launched an independent report into community food growing, which raises really important questions that come out of this. Can grassroots organisations and policymakers ever truly work together in partnership? There is a real challenge in that sometimes. There's the beautiful demonstration of what can be done on the ground. Believe it, I've seen in my career many times amazing things happen on the ground, and then you take them into the policy making sphere and it's almost a completely different universe where lots of vested interest groups tell you it can't be done even though you've seen it being done. But other questions: does change emerge from incredible individuals, or challenge between opposing sides, or partnership that seeks to reconcile different views? Where does the power in a community truly reside? Is it with the people, or is it with politicians? And perhaps the most important question of all, can planting a patch of carrots on a roundabout really change the world? Well, tonight we've got a fantastic panel that's come together for this wildlife to help us answer those and your questions, of course, tonight. We have Shireen Chung-Blake, who's Future Gardeners Programme Coordinator. She'll be telling us a bit more about her background over her career in a little while, but quite definitely a brilliant person to have on the panel tonight to answer those questions. We have Pam Warhurst, who's the founder, I should say the incredible Pam Warhurst, who's the founder of Incredible Edible. Pam's going to be telling us a lot more about some of the work she's done for more than 40 years in this space as well, and really knows her stuff around this. Talking about people who know their stuff, we've also got Professor Tim Lang, who's Professor Emeritus of Food Policy and many other things besides. Currently a member of the Mayor of London's Food Board as well. Tim's someone I've known for many years and supported myself and the Wildlife Trusts around food policy for a long time on that. And then we have our very own Dominic Taylor, Dom Taylor, who's Action for Nature Community Organisers Manager with Warwickshire Wildlife Trusts. And with over a decade of experience in community organising, Dom is helping shape Wildlife Trust movement building strategies that blend broad-based and place-based organising with citizen science, nature connection, action and advocacy. So delighted to welcome you all tonight. Thank you very much, panel. Welcome to this amazing wildlife. Tim, I'm going to start off with you if I can. I was saying there, of course, you are Professor Tim Lang, Professor Emeritus of Food Policy, but why don't you tell your story a little bit? What brings you here tonight? Over many years, Tim, of working in this space, what's brought you here to this wildlife tonight? And on this particular, in the whole universe around food, why are you particularly interested in this topic tonight?
I'm interested in it for all the reasons you've already said, actually. I'm interested because it's about land use, it's about people, it's about whether we feed people well or badly. It's about whether the competition between, or supposed competition between wildlife and the environment and food growing is irresolvable. I think it's actually quite simple because of what you said. You see it on the ground, you see people looking after ecosystems and growing food. But I think I'm here tonight, why I'm very pleased to be here tonight, is because I think we as a country are at a very interesting moment where lots of things are up in the air. There isn't clarity. It's that policy muddle you said. Craig, where things that should be simple aren't being dealt with simply. And I don't think the joint message of food growing, feeding people, looking after the environment, looking after people, building upon community activities is really getting the wind in its sails that it deserves. And I'm interested in why isn't that and what could we do about it? And as you know, I've spent a 2 or 3 years looking at whether the country is prepared for shocks. And I've been talking to wildlife trusts about that for some time. And would food growing be part of that? And how do we deal with that? So all of what you said, basically.
Brilliant. Well, it's so good to have you here, Tim. Let me start off with the most basic question that, is going to be hanging around the room. So let's deal with it from the absolute outset. Of course, we've heard over the last few years this whole kind of concern about food security, how we're going to feed people. And there have been some people that have tried to suggest that there is this tension between restoring nature, protecting nature, and food security. So let's start off first of all with a question that we got in advance, and do send your questions in, but thank you for those of you that sent questions in advance as well. Brilliant question from Mary Parker. How can the need to conserve the ecosystem be met with the need to provide food security? Question you get all the time, Tim, but go on, give us your brilliant answer.
Okay, I'll do a 30-seconder. If you want the really boring one, it's in my recent report just a few months ago for the National Preparedness Commission, a report called Just in Case. It's free, you can download it. There's a very, very long answer there, but the 30-second version is this. You basically need to look after ecosystems in order to enable the food growing capacity over generations to not just survive, but thrive. Secondly, you need to engage people in that process because food growing doesn't just happen. Thirdly, you need to be very clear that some of the vested interests in food growing throughout what we call the food system, from production right through to serving the consumer. These are very powerful interests, and they've been asked to do a certain pattern of food growing for the last 70 years. And now we know it's not right for now. And it probably wasn't right originally. But we've got a very tricky politics now. But I'm personally a total optimist that I think it's doable. The issue is, can we get enough support to make it done?
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Tell us a little bit more then about your report that you've just published. I mean, this report called Just in Case. You and I had some fascinating conversations about it. What's the work you went through over 2 years to produce it? How did you go about it? Why is it being produced? And what would you say are some of the big recommendations? Because in truth, it is something that needs a lot more attention.
It does. I mean, I've worked on all of this for a long, long time and thinking about it, but for all sorts of reasons, partly because of geopolitics, partly because the speed and pace and urgency of dealing with ecosystems and climate and all of these big determinants, and indeed social determinants, of whether people are fed well or badly or adequately, whether everyone's fed at all. There's a drift. I'm a policy man. I look at policy, although I am very practical. I'm president of Garden Organic, actually, but I was a farmer in the 1970s. I'm acutely aware of the practicalities. And I got asked by a body most people have never heard of because it's relatively new, 4 years old, called the National Preparedness Commission, basically what we would call the great and the good. Very senior people in and across politics, so all felt the country was basically not preparing for shocks, but shocks are coming. We've had the Marks and Spencer and Co-op outage, Spain and Portugal's energy outage, Russian invasion. The temperature's going up, and net zero may be a grand aspiration, but the climate change gases continue to come out. And they said, would you look at food? We're acutely aware the country is not really thinking strategically about food and resilience. What would happen if there are shocks, and could we bounce back? There have been actually big attempts to get British food policy onto a better place in 2007-10, a thing called the 2030 change of government. It went. Henry Dimbleby did a national food strategy. It came, it went, change of government, and here we are doing it again. But that's why things like we're doing tonight, discussing it and discussing with very powerful and influential organizations like Wildlife Trust matters. But as Pam Warhurst, with whom I've worked for many years as well, knows, the issue of feeding people is a really critical one. People can get frightened. And I looked in my report at whether we need to actually have more storage. I think the answer is yes. Do we need to redesign the food system from being this super efficient, permanently moving stuff, hence the just-in-time system of logistics? The answer is yes. Do we need to think about what we feed people, how we feed people? The answer is yes. Do we need to have a clear, better framework and strategy as a country? Yes. But how to do that, what interests me, and I'll stop with this, is that there's lots going on at local level, community level, and at the regional level. I've just spent 3 days in Wales or on the borders. There's a remarkable renaissance going on of attention to exactly these very complex things. And they want leadership to create a new framework above. And that's what my report basically says. It says, look, we need a new framework, we need new legislation, where we need to give powers to regional and local bodies. Pam Warhurst, I'm sure, will talk about the right to grow idea. We need things like that. We need to engage different people all working on or around food, land, feeding people, public health, environmental health. We need to get them together and let them get on with it, because that's not happening. Why? In one sentence, I will say something I've done in previous reports, saying the power, the asymmetry of power in the food system doesn't help us. The reflex in COVID, when suddenly the government said, well, this might be very tricky if we tell everyone to stay at home. What about farmers? What about growers? What about shopkeepers? What about lorry drivers? The food industry it was that went to government and said, do you think we ought to have a meeting and sort this out? Emergency powers were invoked and things like that. And then that was all unraveled as though, oh, we're back to normal. It's what I call the leave it to Tesco et al. Default position. And I think the Wildlife Trust and all of us on this call are basically beginning to know we need something better than that.
Well, let's pick up on that, Tim. I want to push that a little bit harder, because and one of the dangers with these wildlives, with me chairing, is I've spent a lot of my career on panels in the position you're in now, and on the receiving end of really tricky questions as I would trip me up. And there's a danger then I just like pass those on to you tonight, because it helps me with therapy. So um, forgive me for that. But I know you can take it, Tim. There is a question out there, isn't there? The question that some would ask in this audience, I'm going to ask it first, is, and it would go a bit like this: don't be so ridiculous. We need to feed 9 billion people in the world. We need to be feeding people at scale. This is all about the need to really scale up intensive agriculture. Don't be so ridiculous, as if community food growing can do anything to help with food security. It might be a lovely, nice hobby to do, but it can't actually help with food security. You produce this nice report, but honestly, as if it's going to make a difference in a serious problem with food security. What do you say to that, Tim? I mean, you've just
Well, I
described
addressed
it.
that. I addressed that in my report.
So
Square.
you've just described it as the leave it to Tesco et al. Thing. So how do you answer that? Leave it to
Well,
the big boys and girls, and not communities.
you can't ignore the big boys and girls, to use your phrase, nor can you say overnight community growing can sort anything out. It's got to grow. The great thing, and I look at this in 2 very, very big chapters. I look at it in different regions, different parts of the world, different countries. What is so good about community food growing is it gets people together. It doesn't provide 100% of the diet of everyone in a region, but what it does is give islands of hope and support and networks. That's point number 1. Let's nail that. I'm a gardener. Gardening couldn't feed Britain overnight, but could more gardening in towns, you're the Wildlife Trust, in towns, could it do a lot more to provide nutritional needs? The studies all show yes. We should be using space in towns where people are to grow more. Would it feed them 100%? No. There's no illusion about that. You need to have a rebalancing Almost all the analyses points to this, a rebalancing of just assuming big companies will sort it out. The reason that's not good is because we almost certainly, we need more diversity and more diversification. So instead of having a concentration of big producers in monocultures, feeding it into big manufacturers, to big retailers, we almost certainly need to have what the theoreticians of resilience call more distributed, more decentralized, if you like, systems of growing. That's good ecologically as well. So I have no illusion at all, Craig, and I don't know any academics who think differently to me
Yeah.
or I to them.
Yeah.
Small-scale community gardening cannot feed the population overnight, but can it build their confidence? We've seen in wars, in the Yugoslavian war, we saw community growing and individual growing actually kept people going, gave them optimism, gave them extra nutrients that they couldn't get in other ways in dire circumstances of shock. Whereas community growing in normal times is really good for just getting people together, building social solidarity. One of the key things in hunger studies, famine studies, feeding studies, food security analyses of the last 100 years is that in crises, it's social cohesion that really matters most and determines whether everyone is fed or only just some people are fed. If everyone is assumed to be in the pot, they'll all get help. In other words, ecologically, it's we, not I, that matters. It's diversity of everything that matters, not concentration of certain reliance and certain dependencies.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. So you made it very clear it's not either or, we need both, which then tees us up
Correct.
nicely for this question from Ellen Hazelgrave. In what ways can community growers and large-scale farmers come together?
Well, one of the things I did in my report was trawl for ideas. I did very elite down to very ordinary interviews, long and depth interviews with different people across the food system of Britain, some going inside the secret state, some outside, some down to the local level. I really worked very hard to be inclusive. But in the back of my mind was always, and Craig will know this, and Pam too, select committees in the Parliament. They'll have a wide range of interviewees and sources of information. I did that as well. So as one of my colleagues said, it's like Tim's done a one person royal commission, but I had extra help. What we find from that is there is remarkable agreement that what we could do with at the centre, national governments, the English, the UK, the Welsh, the Scots. The Welsh and Scots are further ahead than England, by the way. We need to have better coordination there and clarity of vision. Down to the local level, mayors don't have the powers in England. In Scotland, they haven't decentralized Scotland either. Down to the local level, the community, sometimes communities are stopped from growing stuff that they would like to be able to do. But then in my report, I looked at examples. One of my favorite, I learned a huge amount from, was Flintshire. In Flintshire, the smallest county in Wales in the northeast, 15 years ago, a group of people came together and said, how could we be growing something more? Where can we get some land from? And some landowners came forward in different places, different parts of this tiny county, and said, you can have some land from us. And it's turned into a long-term, a very diverse community activity in some very different parts, high, low, horticulture, under polytunnels, in the open, and the skill share. And if you look at what they did and you look at what other people in Edinburgh, and Pam's got lots of examples like that, and your report, by the way, is full of these examples. It's fabulous. It's people being happy because they're working together. And they're doing a little bit. They're not being totally responsible for everything. It's sharing. It's the us, not me culture that I've said. And food is about that. It's, you don't get food. I was at one point the only professor of food in the world 40 years ago, or lots now. And, but what's the evidence base for this? Well, all human history, actually. In fact, I'll say one final thing, then stop me. One person I interviewed who turned out to have military experience said his neighbour had said, you know, I'll be all right. I've got lots of food. I've got a larder. I've got a gun. I can, if anyone, you know, if we're short of food, I'll be all right. And this person said, the person interviewing said, I had to just sit him down quietly and say, it's not like that in conflict. Because remember, I was asking about what would happen if there were really big shocks. There are small shocks, big scale shocks, slow shocks, sudden shocks. And this was a person who said, it's always about us, us, us. And that was a theme that almost everyone of my interviewees, because I did ask them anonymously, very senior, big shots in industry, said exactly the same. They're seeing that sort of ethos as being necessary.
Great, Tim. Thank you so much. Well, I could listen to you all night, but we do have other panelists I've got to get to, and we've obviously got to get to the Q&A as well. But Tim Lang, thank you so much for that. And just to say, of course, the report that Tim refers to, the report from the Wildlife Trust, Incredible Women's Institute and Garden Organic, my colleagues will have put a link in the chat to that. I'm sure they can also put a link in the chat to Tim's report just in case as well, which has been out recently. We've had some great comments coming in. Thank you very much. Jane from Essex has said, great to have people learning that food does not grow on the supermarket shelves. Thank you, Jane. Good to hear from you. Tony from the Herts and Bedfordshire border. She says she's hoping for insights for starting community food growing hub on her small holding. We've got Karen Stewart from the Eastbourne Food Partnership joining us tonight. Thank you, Karen. And we've got a lovely message. Hi, everyone. Joining you from Growing Local Kick, a community growing project in Hereford. Thank you very much for telling us where you're joining from tonight. It's great. We've got so many people joining. Anyway, before we move on to our next panelist, why don't we have a little look about what we're talking about? We've got a lovely little video here from Dom, who will be joining us on the panel in a little while, and also featuring Sue from our friends at the Women's Institute.
So my name is Sue Bullen, and besides owning an allotment in South East London, I'm also a member of the Blackheath and Greenwich WI.
You've got an allotment, I understand.
I have an allotment, and I had the allotment for 3 years. Now that was quite a, I'd been on the waiting list for a very, very long time. And when the allotment came up, I just grabbed it. At that particular point in my life, I was just about to retire. My son was going off to university, so I was having massive, massive empty nest syndrome. And then on top of that, so I got the allotment in the August, and then my husband was diagnosed with prostate cancer in September. So the allotment became a massive, massive important part of my life. The allotment was just a sanctuary. It just gave me the resilience and the hope and the determination and the future to carry on in a positive way.
What a time. And how did it help when you were sort of, can you cast your mind back to when you went out to the allotment during that time?
It was just basically a safe space. And in fact, the neighbours are the best thing about the allotment generally, because they are very willing to come and help you. And they were fantastic. And they gave me a sense of community, which was amazing. And I can remember when we first went there to look at the allotment, and one of the allotment peers, who actually now is a close friend of mine, just looked at me and smiled. And I thought, this is, I'm home here, I'm home. There's a sense of peace walking into that allotment, which there's nowhere else I would rather be than on that allotment. And the thing about people that garden is they fundamentally are nice. I mean, I've never met a nasty gardener. Well, there probably are nasty gardeners out there, Don, but you know, but they're generally nice because they care and they nurture and they look after and they hope. You know, every time you plant a seed or put up, you hope, don't you? You hope for the future. And I suppose that's what gardening is all about.
I'm a convert and an absolute advocate as well, but I love the way you talk about it. Now, there's quite a special project that you're involved with, isn't there? The food pantry.
Right, the food pantry, exactly, is in conjunction with the Quaggy Development Trust. Now, in December 2022, the WI were asked to volunteer at a community meal. So we all got together with the Quaggy Community Trust and we served over 110 people. After that, there was a feedback form and we decided how to take this forward and what sort of help was needed. So a lady called Pat Slattery, who was a member of the local council, and Anne Johnson, who was president of the Black Youth in WI at the time, decided to set up a community organisation called a food pantry. So basically what happens is this, the community will pay £1 to join the scheme, and then they pay £3.50 a week, and they just come there and they get these 15 items. Now what the WI do, what Black Lives Blickers in Greenwich do, is that they provide the manpower or person power. They stock the shelves, they go and pick up the food that's being donated, and they serve. But the great thing about it is, I think, from a WI point of view, is it shows the WI in action. You know, there was a rally cry to come and help this organisation, and the WI, Black Youth in Greenwich, responded to that. And I just think that's absolutely brilliant. And therefore we feel, or I personally feel, that food and community and sharing and people knowing that they're not alone is a very important role, because that's all part of well-being. We can't do well-being on our own, Dom, without other people.
Well, wasn't that great? That's Sue from our friends at the WI, and actually Dom, my colleague Dom Higgins, who's head of health and education at the Wildlife Trust. Not the Dom that the wonderful Dom Taylor we're going to meet on the panel in a little while. So I hope you enjoyed that. So our next guest from the panel is Shireen Chung Blake, who's Future Gardeners Program Coordinator. Hello, Shireen, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm okay. How are you?
Very good. Great to see you. Tell us about your job. Tell us about your role, and indeed, what's brought you here tonight?
Okay, well, the day job is I work for Bankside Open Spaces Trust, who run the Future Gardeners program. The Future Gardeners program is an amazing free course which supports people who are long-term unemployed and from disadvantaged backgrounds or marginalized backgrounds into careers in horticulture. So yeah, that's what I do during the day for Bankside Open Spaces Trusts, and that's amazing. But actually, I was a primary school teacher, assistant head for many, many years, and I actually just fell into horticulture through food growing. So what brings me to this conversation today is actually I founded a community garden on my estate, and it was purely by chance. So I live in a place where I don't have a garden, I don't have access to greenery on a council estate. And then I just spoke to the council and said, well, could I take over that garden area? And if you let me take over that garden area that I could use, then I'll start a community garden over there. And they said, oh, okay, you can't use that space, but that's brilliant. Thank you so much for agreeing to start a community garden on your estate. And I was like, oh, okay, let's do this. So I was still working as a teacher. So part of it is that you had to get a consultation of other people on the estate to join. But I think I was actually really lucky because I live in the borough of Southwark. So in the borough of how it's all actually come about is in the borough of Southwark, there is actually policy. Because Tim, you mentioned the necessity of it, and it was called the Allotment Expansion Guarantee. So this was part of their Greater Estates programme, which meant that any leaseholder or any tenant on a Southwark council estate could apply for food growing plots on their council estate. And the particularly unique thing about at the time of Southwark Council is they actually had 2 officers who were the food growing officers. So they were then able to meet with me, view the garden, recommend food growing decisions, support me in the consultation process on how to get other residents on board effectively. It also included me going in the staff room, don't tell my old head teacher, and printing off like literally hundreds of flyers and just knocking on doors of my neighbours across the estate. It was over like 300 properties, and just saying, would you be interested in starting a community garden, growing your own food? And it was through those conversations with people on the estate, you just realise the connection of food growing, and how much people relate that to their childhood, relate that to their culture, and really desperately want that opportunity to be able to grow their own food. So yeah, that led to the establishment of initially just 5 garden plots, and a career change. So once I'd managed to get 5 people interested in starting a community garden, and then we got the funding from the local council to actually get in these 5 allotment beds, I then thought I should probably learn how to garden and grow food. So then I'm very lucky in Southwark, just like the Bankside Open Spaces Trust Future Gardeners program, which supports people into horticultural careers. There was also a local horticultural college called Wolf Gardens, and that again was a completely free course, and I was able to complete my level 2 there, which included food growing. So through that, I was then able to develop the food garden to where we did get a outstanding runners up on a national community gardening competition in our first 12 months, just saying. And then also, yeah, I applied for this job with, again, the organization I work for now, which again is a grassroots organization which supports people in local area to have access to green spaces and to upskill local residents to grow their own food. So food growing has completely changed my life, which is why
Brilliant.
I'm here.
Brilliant, Shireen. And you've taken me down a bit of a trip down memory lane there myself. I suddenly remembered that I snuck into the staff room at my school once to use the photocopy to photocopy loads of things about recycling or something. But anyway, so it's a proud tradition, I think, of environmental action. Very, very good. Shireen, you were touching a point there, which actually we had a question from Luke New on in advance of tonight, was how do the communities source spaces to grow on? How are these projects best coordinated and who leads on them?
So again, I was incredibly lucky that with Southwark, we have the policies in place, which were the allotment expansion guarantee. And now, but I think Pam will probably talk more about that. Within Southwark, again, the London borough that I live in, they have the Right to Grow initiative as well, which was a piece of legislation that was put in place and created by Pam, an amazing, incredible edible. So I think she'll talk a bit more about that. But it should be actually that should be consistently across, England, it should be national, and it shouldn't just depend on which borough that you live in to where you can actually have access. So for me in Southwark, it was relatively easy. I should also point out particularly the area I am in Southwark, which is a Walworth area. Before there was the community gardening officers on the council, there was actually a community gardening network called Walworth Community Gardening Network. And it was actually this network of all of the small community gardens or just green spaces that were food growing in the local area coming together to actually advocate and give voice to the needs of people who wanted to grow food and to green spaces in the area to the local council. And it was through their advocacy that actually the local council then appointed the officers. And then through that is how 200, I wrote down the notes here, 241 new food growing plots across Southwark. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
With support. Yeah. So
241 suddenly new plots. That's absolutely incredible. But how Shireen, can we make sure that actually, I mean, that's a brilliant example from Southwark, but that's not going to be happening everywhere.
But it should be.
It could be, yeah, absolutely right. But Liz Long asked the question, how do we make our community food growing accessible and inclusive to all groups? Because there'll be some groups in society that feel perhaps they're shut out from this, feel that they're not allowed to do it or don't know where to start and so on. So how can we deal with that?
I think everything comes back to connections, respect, and understanding that so many different people have connections to food growing. And so it's not this assumption that, people won't want to be engaged. I think often that happens, like, oh, how do we reach, this particular group? They don't want to be reached. Like, oh, no, they do. Let's facilitate those conversations. Let's actually go out. Like I said, I printed off the flyers, but I didn't just print off the flyers. I went and I knocked on doors and I had conversations. And I actually also acknowledge that the wealth of experienced knowledge through different cultures. So another thing that I did is wherever I saw someone randomly growing on, like, on the smallest, like in an old shopping trolley on the side of a corner somewhere, I made the intention to go out and speak to them. It's like, hi, you're a keen gardener, like, let's get involved. I'd love to hear your experience. It comes from, I think personally, a level of respect and understanding. It's a mutual exchange of experience, of knowledge, of enthusiasm. And I think that's how we engage people, by approaching people with respect. Yeah,
absolutely right. And then building that, exactly what Tim was saying before, how this builds community resilience, community strength through this process as well. It's not just about growing food, but it's growing communities essentially. Absolutely amazing. Right, well, Shireen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited about some of the things you're going to be saying in the Q&A, so we'll get onto that in a little while, but thanks so much for joining us. Our next guest is the incredible Pam Warhurst, from the founder of Incredible Edible. That I first got to know of Pam when, this is a bit of a name drop moment, but when we were talking to the then Prince of Wales. I think he's got a new gig now. But he was we were talking to him about setting up this thing called Coronation Gardens. And his feedback was, well, you have to involve Pam Warhurst and the amazing Incredible Edible. So we contacted Pam Warhurst, and we're thrilled that he suggested that, because it has been brilliant to work with you, Pam, and others at Incredible Edible over these last couple of years. Tell us, Pam, about, I mean, you've been an activist and advisor in this space for 40 years. So just give us a little bit of a flavour. Why are you so passionate about this issue, and what's kind of brought you here tonight, and with still the fire in your belly around this?
I know. What can you do? So I've been involved for 40 years in local, regional and national politics around the environment, around countryside, around rural, around stuff like that. But it was only when Tim got on a stage and challenged, get off your backside and go and do something, basically, to an audience, that because I've been concerned about climate change and the crisis since the Rio West Summit, when I was a local authority leader and a chair of a health trust and all that malarkey, and because I'd seen no national or international real leadership on this climate crisis, Tim's words and challenge from the stage forced me to get on a train to where I live, which is a place called Todmorden in the north of England, and make up this thing called Incredible Edible, because it seemed to me if the people that we elected weren't prepared to really identify the needs of people and planet, then maybe, rather than have a whinge about it, we'll just roll up our sleeves in the place we call home and see what we can do to demonstrate an alternative proposition. That's all it was. Can we demonstrate it? And how would we actually motivate people? Well, the biggest motivator is food. So let's use food as the language that brings us together across age, income, culture and ability, and all the stuff that I have talked about for 17 years about this. And the real truth of the matter is, when you do work with communities at a grassroots level, it gives you that sense of purpose and confidence. And this will be true for any leader in any Incredible Edible group, or social farms and gardens, or, bankside open spaces, whatever. It will give you enough confidence to say, we can do it differently. Don't be frightened of this, leaders. We can do it differently. We're only a piece of the jigsaw, but it ain't a picture without us. So I think that's the reason I've still got fire in the belly, is I know we can do it. I know we are part of a solution. And I know that the current thinking around the climate, feeding people, biodiversity loss, land use is so inadequate. What have we got to lose? Why wouldn't we trust the people? Why is our default position not, let's see what we can do at a grassroots level and bring that sense of purpose to the decision-making table when we're starting to talk about policy shifts, rule changes with food and the planet. So that's why I'm still passionate, because I know folks can do it and I know folks can be trusted. And I think the missing link of this is that outside bit of the jigsaw with the flat pieces all the way around it, which is the supportive framework that allows everybody to crack on in the middle.
Pam, I really want to ask you the same question I asked Tim earlier, because you would have heard it many times over the years. There will be those out there that say, what a load of lovely nonsense, but let's leave this to Tesco et al. They're the big boys and girls, actually for producing food security and feeding millions of people. What's your answer to that?
My answer to that, if that was the answer, we wouldn't be in the pickle we're in now. Would be part of my answer. And my answer to that is at no point. And then very, very early on in Incredible Edible, I was on a Radio 4, you and yours. And the very nice lady said, so tell me, Pamela, are you trying to feed all of Todmorden with what you're doing in your propaganda garden plots? To which the answer is no. That is not what I'm trying to do. What I am demonstrating is that we can grow food differently. What I am demonstrating is if you harness a different approach to investment in people and land, you get better outcomes for people and planet. That is what I'm trying to demonstrate. And the truth of the matter is that the proof of concepts are all out there. Everything you've heard Shireen say, everything you heard Tim say, Thousands and thousands of people know they can crack on and do it, but sometimes it's more difficult to do it. So just winding back from that, there was a piece of work, of course, it's a finger in the air bit of research. Forgive me, Lancaster University, I didn't really mean that, but it's not the most robust piece of research you've ever seen, but it's very strongly indicative that if we actually repurpose the land we pay our taxes for, we could grow one heck of a lot more food in an environmentally friendly way. And we could cut down supply chains, and we could make people healthier, and we could reconnect communities, and we could start to think about the importance of biodiversity. And all that comes from releasing people power and repurposing land. So my answer to it is, then something is not right, but thousands of people week in and week out are demonstrating that they have a passion for food, they have a passion for community, and they want to reinstate a really vibrant environment in the place they call home. Let's think about what frameworks can do to help more people do that. And let that be a part of the solution to the food crisis that we're going to see on our doorsteps very, very soon. Only a part, but a vital link.
Great, thank you, Pam. Well, look, let's get into a couple of more specifics. We had a great question from Rachel Swinnerton, said, what can be done to make it easier for councils to enable community gardens to be built on highways, I guess road verges, that kind of things, in urban areas?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I mean,
not me, that was Rachel Swinnerton.
Good old Rachel, thank you for that. Right, let's go back. 17 years of doing this. I know people can do it. I also know it's so hard for some groups who haven't got a good working relationship with their council, who've never approached people in power before. And what, you know, at the first no, or, you know, kick into the long grass, just lose the confidence and don't do it. Which is why the main thing that we're asking for and campaigning for at the moment, in partnership with others, is let us repurpose public land that is paid for by taxation. Let us re-establish a different conversation between people and local authorities, or health authorities, or defence estates, or anybody that, you know, or has land that the people pay their taxes for. Let's open up a conversation about, okay, which land do we want to grow on? Which land do we want to grow on and improve our environment at the same time? And how you has heard it. They are fantastic beyond belief, because they put the pieces of, you know, they did the thing in order. They got the staff in place to support the community, to give the community some of the basic assets they needed to start to grow food on their estates. So that were great. Then Hull came along. Hull have done some fantastic work and adopted the right to grow as a council. And now for 12 months have tested that in partnership around the same table, not just the politicians, but the people, how together in Hull they can work out how much food they can grow, where it can grow, and what the community needs for them to just crack on. And one of the things they've done, Craig, is they have covered the insurance costs for those groups. Fantastic. That says a heck of a lot. So if we could re-establish that trusted understanding that Shireen was talking about, we know Hull have done it. We know Runnymede have done it. We're working across cities in the north where they're really interested in picking up this agenda of repurposed land for food and nature. What we kind of need is what, if I may finish with this, what I had when I led nationally on a completely different campaign, which was a campaign with the Countryside Agency in a previous administration for a right to roam. And I chaired a national cross-cutting body that advised on how to do it. And what made a difference with people who who didn't get on, who didn't get on, whether it's mountaineers and Moorland Association or ramblers or horse riders, was the Secretary of State said, do it. We're going to have a right to roam, make it work. That's all that's going to happen. We're going to repurpose public land, make it work. And local authorities and people will make it work.
Great, Pam. Otherwise known as political leadership, by the way. Is that called? Fantastic. I have to say, I'm absolutely loving tonight. What I'm seeing, what the audience at home sadly can't see, is I'm seeing the reactions of all the other panelists as people talking. Shireen, you've got a lovely, big, huge smile on your face. So whenever, you know, Pam or Tim or say anything, it's just the reacting away. I'm absolutely loving this. So there's a real kind of buzz here. So I just wanted to share that with the audience. But Pam, back to you. You were saying there, we were talking about, we were leading to that point about political leadership. And actually, we did have a question from Andrew Linnell. It says, what do you consider the most effective method of lobbying local councils and MPs around this issue?
Demonstrating what good looks like.
Getting them down.
Not picketing. I don't picket them.
Yeah.
I've never picketed anybody in, well, I have in the past, but recently I've never picketed in recent history. Demonstrate it, bring them on board, cook them some food from it, tell them that we could amplify this all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, let them be on the team that wants change. Don't poke them in the eye. It's not the greatest idea in the world. And you'll find that most local authorities that we talk to want to do this. They're just a little bit frightened about what it means because they're kind of haven't got the right load of money and whatever it is. So we've created a national sharing, knowledge sharing network across the north and across London, so that councils, officers, the public can talk to each other about subjects. Tim's spoken at some of them, other people, just to stimulate people to know they're not alone. They, in their own job, in their own borough, in their own community, are not alone. There are thousands of people who want to do this. We just need to build some confidence.
Brilliant. Well, Pam, thank you so much. And again, really looking forward to your contribution to the Q&A, which is coming soon. Get your questions in tonight if you want to ask our fantastic panel your questions. There's some brilliant comments coming through. We had, I just kind of see, we had Diane Ketcher said, Tim is coming to Letchworth Garden City to talk to the town in the Broadway Centre, in the Broadway Cinema, I should say, on June the 22nd about this very subject. Really looking forward to hosting him. So there you are, you've got your fan club in advance there, Tim. Absolutely fantastic. We've had David in Cromer said the American supermarket ignores variable supply, ignores, hurts the producers, which is a disincentive. Too little means a good price. Is the continental model superior? Interesting. Whole load of comments, keep them coming in. It's just brilliant to see your enthusiasm for this conversation tonight. So now let's go to our next panelist, and it's our very own, if you like, Dom Taylor, Action for Nature Community Organisers Manager with Warwickshire Wildlife Trust. Good evening, Dom.
Good evening, Craig.
Great to have you joining us, and tell us a little bit about your kind of background and your story, how you've ended up here talking about this issue tonight.
Yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, I've been a community organizer, grassroots place-based community organizer for over 10 years before coming to the trust. I've been at the trust for almost 3 years now, and kind of bringing in that community organizing ethos and way of working across the team. We have 2 organisers working in different parts of Warwickshire. Again, as grassroots organisers, listening to lots of residents at a local level, kind of finding out more around their connection to nature and wildlife. But again, you know, kind of listening to a lot of what has been said in the conversation today. There's that kind of key theme around bringing people together. That relational organising is an approach that we take. You know, we find that that's that kind of first way of collectively building power in the community. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially kind of me and my role at the trust.
Brilliant. Well, you've been making a huge impact, I know, Dom, so it's great to have you with us. And I know you're also feeding into thinking around community organising across the wildlife trusts more generally. So actually, I'll throw you this brilliant question from Katie Hurd, which is obviously true for this issue about community gardens, but true for really anything to do with community organising. Katie Hurd asks, community gardens are set up with earnest and enthusiasm, but what is the secret to keeping that enthusiasm burning to allow for future-proofing the efforts for the first energised garden team?
It's a fantastic question. I mean, for me, I guess I'll go back to that first point around that relational organising, you know, developing those relationships, developing trust within the group, not just making it business as usual, you know, getting people to know each other, to understand what their self-interests are, what their motivations are, what they want to achieve collectively as well, and really tapping into the kind of gifts and talents within that group as well. So really understanding them, really understanding each other, and building that trust for me are the foundations
of building that longevity and that sustainability. I mean, the thing is with something like, taking over any kind of green space for any reason, but in this case for food growing, in my experience as an organizer, working in lots of different areas in Birmingham and Coventry, we often talk about apathy or resistance to change, or kind of resistance to getting involved in things that they don't feel belongs to them. I've met so many amazing people that do want change and do want to do something. And I feel that, the biggest kind of barrier, rather than apathy, is kind of time and energy and capacity. So whenever we're building anything, it's thinking about how do we design this with those with the least time to be able to participate in that. And I think if you kind of focus from that perspective, that's where you start to build a more resilient and inclusive movement or action or whatever it is that you are working on.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's a similar sort of theme, and when you started, you've been answering this already, but it's such a good question. I'm going to ask it slightly different one again. It's from Jacqueline Tegan, who says, just simply, how do we turn talk into action?
I mean, another great question. Again, I feel that turning talk into action starts with that. Again, I'll connect it to power, but the power that resides within, and that soft power, that relational power, but also the power within the idea and the inspiration that comes from that, from the belief in that. We start with our power within, so that self-belief that we're able to achieve something. So I think kind of building from that power within, that power with others in your community, and that relational power, and then changing that in the power to take action or the power to influence. So a lot of people don't like this term, but for me, it's not about the action, it's about the journey, and the journey that you take people on. And again, working in a wide range of communities, it's working from that starting point of them, and working with them towards achieving that action from their starting point and at their pace.
Brilliant, Dom. Absolutely fantastic. Well, there's so much more to hear about tonight, and we're getting great questions and comments coming in. As I was saying, there's Rachel Baker has said, if it's a question of land ownership in the end, and so perhaps your friend King Charles could do us all a favour and release some of his own thousands of hectares for community food growing. Yeah, interesting. You've had Karen Stewart has said, our council keep pushing the conversation and the right to grow motion, keep pushing back on cabinet meetings. Very frustrating for us as a food partnership. Yeah, brilliant comments coming in. Thank you very much. We're going to go to another video now, just to give you a sense of what's involved here. You'll all be aware of the brilliant organisation Mind, of course, that works with people with mental health, and of course the local branch of that, Washington Mind, up in the northeast, is a branch of the National Mental Health Support Charity. They're in County Durham, and that local branch decided that they want to do something. The community there decided they want to do something with their outside space, and with a little support from Durham Wildlife Trust, they created a wildlife-friendly, fully accessible garden that's become a calm space for the wider community, including local schools, and also growing food. Let's have a little look now.
We've got so many lovely groups here, craft and exercise and all different kinds of groups. And I thought, well, we've got nothing outdoors. And so we got permission to grow things and dig. And we started off with one raised bed. And one or two people decided they would like to come. So that's how it started out. And because we got quite a bit of interest, we thought, well, we need money to start this off. When we needed tools, we needed everything. We didn't know we were starting from scratch. And that's how it started. With the help of Tom and the rest of the people in the group, we managed to secure this fund.
The changes that have resulted from Ruth's first initial ideas are, again, wholly hers and the rest of the community that have been involved here. My inclusion has been any support, advice or guidance on elements that they wanted to see here, and where they've actually learned from me through asking the questions about how they can support it. It has been completely their ideas.
Came down, saw the staff here, and they made us very welcome. Said, why don't you join some of our groups? One of which was the gardening group. And it's a great way to meet other people and to learn things.
I hope that the people who have come here have learned more about wildlife, and that they will go on to pass things on to other people and perhaps go home and do things themselves, you know, learn to make green spaces in their own area and just pass the message on.
We come every month and the children really, really look forward to it. I think it's a calm space for them where they can come and explore lots of different things. They've seen the garden change so much over the months that we've been coming. And for each child, there's been something that's really interested them.
We get to learn lots about nature and the outdoors. It's also really fun to help Tom on his adventure with nature.
With it being Washington Mind, who we're working in partnership with, there are a lot of different needs within the group, and I think ensuring that all access and abilities were covered for in that time has been really crucial, but also making sure the weekly sessions that were on here, everyone who came had a job to do and weren't felt left out, and that was a real challenge because of the access to site, and we've overcome that with some of the funding money.
I watch people come in here, join this group, and they come in like tight little buds and they open up into beautiful flowers because they start to connect with each other, and they get such a satisfaction and a thrill from planting a seed and growing, and that really helps them, that they've done something and they go away feeling good about themselves, and they make friends as well.
I do live on my own, and it was getting where I was feeling very isolated, so it means I can come down here any day of the week. I'm here meeting people of all sort of social skills and issues and helping them as much as they're helping me, I feel.
I've always been a person who rushes around like mad and gets severe anxiety. That's why I ended up coming here 11 years ago. You can't hurry gardening. That's what it's done for me. It's slowed me down, and the satisfaction from growing things and seeing the joy in other people's faces when they come. It's wonderful, really, yeah.
Isn't that lovely? I defy anyone to watch that video and not have a big smile on their face, if not perhaps even a tear in their eye. So we're into the Q&A now, to our brilliant panel where you can make comments or ask questions. Still loads of ones coming in. Thank you so much for that. Just some kind of brilliant comments here. We had Tamara said, I think people expect too much now. Veg and fruit all year round, including exotics. In my childhood, it was all local and seasonal. We've had a lot of comments along that line. I want to ask you now, particularly given this is a week, you know, there's a lot of talk about housing in the media at the moment, and of course government's talking a lot about it. We've had a question from Michael Fosdyke, said, at a time when councils are scratching around for land on which to build, how can you convince them to release this land to grow vegetables? Tim, you're nodding. What do you think? Oh, you're mute. Sorry, Tim. Maybe we can. There we go.
I don't know how that happened. I hadn't touched my machine. As it happens, the reason I was smiling and nodding was because yesterday I was at a meeting in Mid Wales with a county council addressing exactly this issue. Caught with crippling interest payments they've got to pay for their education, refurbishing schools and so on, but they own some land, quite a lot of land, and they would love it to be better used and continue to be used for food growing. So this is a big scale issue almost everywhere, which is why Pam's Right to Grow campaign is so good. And I think we're only going to address this issue about access to land in a sort of quite a patchwork way. I was thinking as the others were talking of some of the case studies I did in my big report. Community cafe in Chester Street, a really, wouldn't mind me saying it, very run down post-industrial area. In very poor areas of Edinburgh, in Flintshire, northeast Wales. I went to visit in south of Belgium, French-speaking Belgium, entire city, a bit like Sheffield, deindustrialized. The same issue, this issue comes up everywhere, Craig. It's not just in rural areas, it's everywhere. And we've got to, I think, and this is a challenge, if I can say, Craig, it's a challenge to you and the Wildlife Trust. Actually, big landowning is partly small landowning, partly big, partly institutional, partly leftover. One of the things I got from my Flintshire example was they found a big landowner who was quite happy to give them quite a large bit of land and said, look, use it. This is terrific. They don't want to necessarily have cows grazing absolutely everything. He said, make what you will of this. They found facilities and assets that weren't being used that they said, okay, you can use it. One of the things my report, I realize I didn't answer your question. One of the things my report suggested is that one of the methods we've got to do wherever we are is to do a review of community food assets. What is there in the community? Is it land? Is it a festival catering company who's got fantastic resources to encourage people to go into cooking and then back into Shireen's area of sort of community growing in an urban area? Doing a community asset, food assets audit, it seems to me is a really good idea. And there's some work going on with academics and some local authorities, one in Bradford and one in London, trying to say, what would that look like in different parts? And I think we need to do that in rural areas. And the meeting I was at in Powys yesterday was about the hot politics of that. And the leader of the council was there and deputies. It was really interesting. They actually buy what we're talking about tonight, and it changes their discourse. They spend all their time having to balance the books and juggle big money issues. And if there's public pressure to say, no, we want to keep those county farms, we want to actually open them up, we want to create new ones, it's us going on the front foot rather than being all the time saying, you can't do anything. You can do anything. There's big moves in Powys to try and buy out and make into a community trust the whole of the county council's land, which it actually is having to sell to pay the interests on refurbishing schools. It's their legal duty to do that. So we've got assets which could be used, assets which aren't being used, and it all comes down to whether we can get enough political will, actually.
Yeah, it so often comes back to that. Pam, you must have basically been asked this question 1,000 times over the years. Actually, we need the land on which to build houses, rather than make more space for community gardens. I mean, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, well, my answer to that is that there's no better solution finders to these knotty problems than local people in the place they call home. They can do the feedback loops. They know where there's some tricky places. They know where, housing can be built. And so, first of all, we've got to bring back that decision making to a more local level, to hear the voice of people in that decision about how land is used. And there is an awful lot of land. There's an awful lot of public land, and it isn't being used appropriately, and it could feed people. And to be quite, and before anybody else asks me a question about it, to my knowledge, once people get involved in community food growing, none of them wants to poison their kids. So they do not put all manner of horribleness in the soil. They suddenly start to understand that link between a good environment and good food. I'll just park that. But there are lots and lots of examples. You're going to Letchworth, fantastic in Letchworth. The idea of the Garden City movement, the idea of being able to build properties that were homes for people, that had land around it, that captured the value of the land as you improved it and put it back into the community. These are fundamental shifts that we ought to start making. Plus, I used to chair something called the Apple Garden, which was an attempt to work with a high school in partnership to teach 3 different types of growing skills: aquaponics, hydroponics, and soil-based growing. It didn't get anywhere because we were obsessed with the tick mentality. And basically, the high school was of the view that it was only silly people who bothered growing food, as opposed to these most important heroes of our future. But if we think about how we design cities, food and the environment is a STEAM subject: science, technology, engineering, arts, and maths. Everybody needs to think about what their contribution is to feeding a nation and to investing in nature. And it might be around building buildings so we can grow on the roofs. Lots of places all over the world do that. Creating urban settlements that have got fantastic green infrastructure that people grow up. We're doing it in our own small way in Todmorden, but look at Rio. Look at the other places in the world. There's loads of places growing food where it's not grown in parts of the UK. So my answer to that is, it's not that it's not a tricky question, but let us not start from the proposition that everything's in conflict.
Yeah.
If you start to look at that asset base, and this, for me, that's about a right to grow coming together. What are the food assets? What are the land assets? What are the people assets in the place we call home? And how can we shift them in order to produce better outcomes? And if a government was to give us a steer, then policymakers will follow. And my word, they will follow the community, because the community is way ahead of them on this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really struck by what you're saying there, that it helps to listen to the local people, that they have the best idea on how land is used. But that's not our politics over the last little while has moved away from that. It seems to be saying to sort of centralized decision making around how land is used even more.
And it's fantastic that in this country, we've actually started to talk about land use.
Right, yeah.
I am well pleased about that.
Yeah.
Having said that, I just think people need to, and I know I'm not arguing that people are making poor decisions. What I'm saying is, open the door and let the community in.
Yeah.
Because part of what you're trying to do can only be achieved in partnership with the community.
Yeah.
Whatever your planning policy, your housing policy, your education policy is. If you do that, you'll get better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just it also, we've got to recognize that sometimes it suits some politicians, particularly nationally, to try and turn one thing against each other.
Yeah.
Suggest that it's food or housing, or indeed, as we've seen recently, suggestions that it's nature or housing, when in fact clearly the answer has to be both and in all of those kind of cases. We've had a question from Asha Alice, and I reckon this is going to be a great question to put to both Dom and Shireen. Both of you touched on it in your answer, but I want to dig it into a bit more. What are the main factors affecting the resilience of community food growing gardens? And they said positive and negative. So Dom and Shireen, I think you both talked before about what's needed to make community food growing strong, and any kind of community grouping strong. What are the things that can knock them off course, and how do we kind of deal with that? How can we kind of anticipate that and try and make sure it doesn't do that? Dom.
I think for me, in terms of not knocking them off course and building that resilience, again, it really just depends on the community groups that you are engaged with and who you're working from, and understanding them and their needs and the level of support that they need to be able to progress and move forward. I think once you've established that, you can work with them to overcome those barriers that put that resilience in. Not sure if Shireen has a different take on that.
No, I would just agree with what you're saying, and it really is looking at the structure in those community groups as well, because being honest, burnout is very real, isn't it? Like when there is just maybe 1 or 2 really enthusiastic people that are taking the lead, it then often leads to burnout, or that person, for example, might move away. So what actual structure do you have in that community garden for sustainability, so for longevity? What systems do you have in place so it's not dependent on one person? And what I would say is I think, a change in the industry or an awareness of the industry now, so that there are actually courses that are actually supporting how to run a community garden. So you've got the Gardenizer course, you've got John Little as well, doing lots of actual support for the garden leaders that actually then give them the skills to actually develop the ability for the gardens to be sustainability. But also, I think just try and keep it fun, try and keep it inclusive, try and keep it enjoyable for the people to partake. And I think like you said as well, what are people's reasons for joining the community group? And I think a lot of the time it was actually the food growing. So your first harvest is one of your biggest engagements, sharing that food and having those conversations. And people, like I said, might be there just because they want a conversation, to be able to speak to someone. So what is it that's keeping the people engaged in the group, and how do you continue to support that and provide those opportunities with the community group? That's what I would say.
Can I just briefly say, without a shadow of a doubt, and there is such community leadership there already, and they do need all the help they can get. But if we actually thought across sectors and silos, and thought in terms of all the different policy strands and investment opportunities, how can we help everybody be a winner on this one? How can we help them succeed? What can public health and the NHS do in order to make this more real? How can we fund those growers? How can we do what Southwark's done? How can the local authority do that? How can we encourage apprenticeships so people can see jobs in local food growing? How can we actually bring together all those strands of investment opportunity we've got and shake them up? Because we're not in the 1950s. We're now, we're coming into a climate crisis. We need to shake up the investment mindset and the people mindset so that culturally we start to come together around food and nature. Because irrespective of the colour of your political party, there's only one major crisis here, and it's the climate. And it impacts on everything. So really, I guess what we're saying in the Grassroots is, give us a chance. We will come together and be positive, but you just need to work out what support we actually need to keep going. And you will have a piece of the equation, local authority person or elected member or whatever. So make it real for us and we'll deliver the rest.
Great. All right. Thank you, Pamela. We've got loads more comments coming in from Sandra Nani. Hello, Sandra. Nice to hear from you. I love the food pantry idea, says Sandra. So useful for the local community. I will look it up and see if we can do something similar in Surrey Heath. That's one of the things we love about these wildlife, when people learn from each other, including the audience. JQ says, I have a couple of allotments. One is wildflowers for pollinators. Second is food and flowers. Besides the food, it fills me with joy. That's a lovely word, isn't it? Joy. Marion Harding has said, growing food, whether as a community, family or individual, is a wonderfully rewarding and enables people to understand the connections between growing methods and the effect on the environment. And that's a really important point, Tim, isn't it? About this issue about how the more you grow your own food, it massively increases your knowledge and interest around food growing and food systems more generally.
I think we've all said that in different ways, haven't we? That it's the doing of food growing and community food growing, or even up high scale. One of the things that I'm interested in, and you too, Craig, I know, because we've discussed it, is somehow when you get bigger and bigger scale farming, the farm just becomes some very big technocratic, very often technocratic, and sort of it's disembodied, it's disconnected. That's what I'm looking for. Disconnected from food. And one of the things that troubles me is, how can we get that scale of meaning in? And some people would say, well, this is, boring Professor Lang being romantic about a peasant existence. No, it isn't. It's about re-injecting the value of food into food values. So much of farming and mass use of land in Britain is about producing commodities. It's not feeding people at all. I'm an ex-farmer, so here's when I throw it out and say I'm an ex-farmer actually, but I'm really critical of how farming justifies itself and really terrible practices by saying we're feeding people. They're not. The hackneyed stuff. over half of the grain fed to animals when we need to be reducing animals. How we produce food is one of the most key outcomes from community gardening. People get it suddenly. They don't just get the pleasure we saw in that lovely video and the sort of just the well-being. It's that word that's in the founding charter of the United Nations World Health Organization, well-being. You feel well, you like the felt, and food makes you well. It's all of that. But what we've kind of lost, the food system has disengaged food and us as consumers, the mass majority, from primary growing. The powerfulness of community growing or allotments or anything, just growing some food on your balcony, is it's an attempt to reconnect, to remind yourself where it comes from. But my report that I worked on for the last 2.5 years is a very sober one. It's saying, look, shocks are coming. If we don't really get a grip of climate change, if geopolitics isn't sorted out, if we allow ransomware to run amok, which it is, and remember, my report came out before Marks and Spencer's went down and Co-op went down, before Spain and Portugal went down. You know, my report was about that. It was saying, shocks are coming, dear British public. How are you going to be in food if that's the first thing people want is a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something? And after 30 days, they're starving. They want food. The first thing you need actually is water. One of the things I knocked is saying that food is actually, after a shock, it's not the number one thing. Water is the number one thing. So I think this takes us, and I'll say this and shut up, it takes us into the macro politics. Here we are in England, when for the third time in the last 20 years, the state is having a rethink about food. The food strategy is really important for the Wildlife Trust and all the people on this call to get engaged, to ask their MP, to say, look, is the right to food in this? There's been a lot of concern that the Strategy Advisory Board is heavily food industry, big Mr. and Mrs. Normal, business as usual. Not enough of what we're talking about here. But the government set up a sort of citizens consultations process. Well, let's breathe life into that, run by the Food Foundation and Food Farming Countryside Commission. These are good people. But there's some hot politics here we mustn't lose sight of. It's now is a moment within this next year. This decisions are going to be made. We need legislation to put right to grow into legislation. My report was very clear. We need a new strategy in legislation to nail it down. One of the reasons we're getting engaged about climate change is because we've got the Climate Change Act. We need a Food Change Act, or what I called for in my report, a Food Security and Resilience Act, which is built around people and all the themes we're dealing with today. So there's some hot politics. I'm sorry to bring that back, but that's my job. I'm a professor of food policy. It's about decision making. And while we can do a lot at the local, it needs to be facilitated from the centre. And the meeting I was at in Powys yesterday, mid Wales, you know, what was so good was the council is saying, no, get on with it, as it were. I said, you're blessing this process. That's terrific. But there needs to be some hard politics to it as well.
Can I just jump in really briefly and just say one thing, which is, when I kicked off Incredible Edible, I kicked it off because of the climate and because of my belief in people. But when we actually started growing and just doing it and not asking for permission and all the stuff that we ever did, what we found, more and more people were interested in where their food came from. So they were asking questions about their food. Yeah. So I'm an economist. I do not understand why people start with creating a load of supply without actually sorting the demand out. The people can bring the demand. The people can challenge the powers that be. The people can go to the market stall and say, what's the state of this pig that I'm eating the bacon from? Or where did those eggs come from? Or whatever it is. The market responds to that. So more and more people asking for more and more environmentally sound food that is created locally will lead to a sticky money economy where more people are interested in getting more local jobs. So as part of a solution, people can start that conversation going, which will give the politicians confidence that this isn't about hugging a tree and hoping for the best. Yeah. This is living proof and strong evidence that people and planet can work in harmony through the community gardening movement and through those sorts of food growing local initiatives that we've been talking about all night.
Brilliant. So I want to ask a question to Dom, and you might think this is kind of an internal wildlife trust question I want to ask you, but I'm fascinated to kind of know. It's like, Dom, this is something we've really leaned into in the last 2-3 years. I mean, actually, there's a bit of a longer history at the Wildlife Trust of thinking about food and food issues, but we particularly leaned into it in the last 2-3 years. And I can imagine there might be some people out there, either colleagues internally or supporters or people externally, that think, oh no, this is, you know, why is a nature organization leaning into the kind of food debate and food side of things? Did you get that response at all from people in the community, or from members, or from even from colleagues, in which case you and I can talk privately about that? But no, but I'm just fascinated. Do you get that pushback, or does it make complete sense to people that a nature organization like the Wildlife Trust should be in this space?
I mean, for me, I feel that as a trust, actually, this really resonates across the board, from landscapes to agriculture to the community team. I think there is a kind of a natural correlation between food and nature and wildlife, and that nature positive production of food and the impact that that has to both the climate and the natural environment. At a local level in the community, I'd say, you know, a lot of the people that my team have had positive one-to-ones with when they've been listening out in the community, it's the ideas have been there, but actually there's been a lot of resistance on allotments, you know, kind of to share that space with communities, or to make space for nature, wildlife, or, you know, to kind of use more environmentally friendly products on the allotment. So that's been really interesting, because to me, you know, I don't have a nature or wildlife background, there's no ecology or conservation background, kind of coming in fresh out of, you know, kind of working in communities around social action. I didn't have many assumptions, but one of those assumptions were that allotment holders would be the kind of the low-hanging fruit, the kind of the warm leads, the people that we'd be able to find that would be kind of engaged with I guess, you know, the topic, the area that we are discussing with them. But actually there was this, you know, like a few different allotments across the areas that we've been working in. There's been some pushback from some of those allotment holders, but generally I'd say it's been really positive.
I found that in my report too. Allotments as a movement are sort of quite internally conflicted, Dom. I totally agree. But nonetheless, I think there's a shift going on. I don't know if that's your experience. There's much more interest now saying, look, this is actually very important for the reasons we've all been talking about, the consciousness about food, and also the desire for well-being and desire to have food which isn't polluted, which doesn't have pesticide residues. I think the tide is changing or turning a bit there.
Yeah, well, I'd say those people that we're listening to, you know, they're going into those spaces and challenging the establishment. So definitely that is happening. There's more of those voices there. And just, you know, kind of connecting this to an earlier conversation around the housing and the green spaces and community green spaces. So although I don't come from, you know, a conservation background, you know, listening to thousands of residents across Birmingham and Coventry, I've asked the same question, you know, what's your vision for your community? And a lot of people will say, you know, for it to be a nicer place to live. What does that mean? And then they will tell me that, you know, they want it to be greener, cleaner, safer. Well, describe that to me. More trees, more green spaces, more parks, more community growing spaces, more flowers, you know. So I feel that in terms of a sort of allyship, whether it's green space for nature recovery, green space for playgrounds, green space for growing food, you know, actually there's a lot of people in the community that don't want to live in a concrete jungle, that don't want it to be this bland space and want nature and wildlife there. And I think that's something that kind of connects us all with what we're hoping to achieve.
Absolutely brilliant. Shireen, I can see you're wanting to say something here, add to this.
Yeah, I was just adding, I think, on what Tim was saying as well, is like what we've seen in our garden and also through the Future Gardeners program. It's actually there is this desire to be more organic. So, and because a lot of trends where our younger like garden users come in is actually Instagram. And on Instagram, you're going to get the Three Sisters, you're getting organic planting. And actually, this is where you see people coming to the allotment going, oh, I saw this, let's see if it works. And there's this real kind of trend and desire to keep away from chemicals. They want the biodiversity in the garden. They want the flowers, they're planting, companion planting, because this does seem to be a very hopeful trend. And I think this also comes from, if you're looking at the actual horticultural colleges again and provision, a lot of the food growing techniques is actually changing to organic, practical food growing techniques and methods as well now. So I think there is a trend including across the industry, which is really hopeful and really positive. And I think it is, I hate this term, trickling down, but trickling down into like the grassroots levels and people choosing to grow food organically, which is exciting.
Fantastic. Shireen, thank you very much. Well, look, I did say to the panel before we came on that the time will go very quickly, and I'm sorry to say we're pretty much out of time. So I'm going to come to each of you now just to give me 1 minute kind of final summing up. I'm going to ask it this way, actually. If you could, if we had Keir Starmer and Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, on the panel with us now, and you just had 1 minute to say to them what needs to happen on this, what would you say? Let's start with that. I'll start with you, Tim, on that side of things. So I might ask a slightly different question to one or two of the others, but Tim.
Good point. I don't think we're getting the leadership politically. So to Steve Reed, who I've only met once, I would say, yeah, water's really important. It's his #1 issue. But food is connected to water. Don't underestimate the power of food to deliver votes for you. You're in real danger of missing a trick on food unless you get this food strategy right. And integrate health, environment, people, well-being, all that we've just been saying. People want a better way of living. And he's the Secretary of State for England in food, environment, food and rural affairs. And the little codicil I'd add to it is you've got to listen to what the Welsh and the Scots are doing it. They're further ahead. You've got to devolve powers to the mayors, to the regions, facilitate it. That would be what I'd want him to do. Facilitate it. Don't be frightened of food. Facilitate it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Pam, what about you? What would you say to Keir Starmer or Steve Reed if they were on the panel right now?
I'd say, please read what Tim's just said in that para, and I'll come in on the second para, which says, make it real. So you've got the will, you've understood the message. We've got enough strategy documents that we shake a stick at. Let's look at how we demonstrate what change looks like. So the first thing you need to do is repurpose public realm. And you need to look at the areas of success, which is Southwark and Hull and elsewhere. And you need to get the directive out to the local mayors and to local authorities to sit down with their citizens and make it real. So I would say repurpose public land for food and nature. It's a positive thing you can do that others will then be able to optimize their impact on. And you will see changes that you could never dream of happening with a top-down approach.
Great.
Brilliant. Well, let's then talk about bottom up for a second, and I'll come to Dom. You know, forget those politicians for a minute, Dom. You've got people in the community in front of you say they want to sort of do something in this space, and they've got a bit of interest. How do you start that conversation?
Well, I think starting that conversation in terms of an interest in the space, you know, just connecting a few things that have been discussed. It's around creating inclusive roles. So, you know, I'd say maybe growing isn't for everyone, and that's fine, but there's other roles for you to be a part of this. And the reason that's important, because I feel that, you know, everyone was talking about that connection and the health and well-being and the collective, the relationships in that group. But actually that connection is the thing that can start to challenge the system, because that's where those conversations will take place. That's where people will build their self-confidence, their understanding, and develop a sense of local pride. And it will start from being able to connect with other like-minded people in a way that works for them and their well-being, and that power of relationship that's there. So that would be my starting point, is to think about the roles within that.
Brilliant, Dom. Thank you very much. And Shireen, if anyone's pondering after watching this tonight, if they haven't done this yet, but this has whetted their appetite, what would you say to them?
Do it. Like, just like grow that little seedling on your window ledge, grow it on your balcony, go outside, and I didn't tell you, but do some guerrilla gardening, just throw some seeds out, just get out there and do it. And then I think it's addictive. Once you start, you then just carry on, and that little change that you make, you don't realize the impact that has on the people around you. Like, they might see that one daffodil bulb that you planted, and that's inspired them. I'm going to go and I'm going to plant, or I'm going to grow. So just do it and you'll find your community. They will come to you.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you everyone for watching tonight. Just before we go and I come to the thank yous, I do want to say, don't forget to visit the Coronation Gardens website. There's a link in the chat. It's mycoronationgarden.org. And that's your opportunity to download the brand new community food growing research report that Tim was talking about earlier, and find out about the 4 partners involved in Coronation Gardens. That's Incredible Edible, Garden Organic, the Women's Institute, and the Wildlife Trusts. And also, just to say, don't forget to like and subscribe our YouTube channel for future live streams and events from the Wildlife Trust. We've got lots planned over the summer. There's no wildlife in June, however, but for the very best of reasons. It's because we're going to be going down to the United Nations Oceans Conference, which is down in Nice in the south of France in June. Don't worry, we're going by train. Very important to get that in. But we're going to be at the UN Oceans Conference to spotlight the work of the Wildlife Trusts around marine conservation, and also be looking at what's happening, what the UK government's doing at the UN Oceans Conference, and what it means for marine conservation back here in UK waters. And we're going to be doing that rather than to wildlife as such. We're going to be doing it with live updates every now and then from the conference. We don't know quite when, but we're putting lots of videos out on social media to give you a sense of what's happening at the UN Oceans Conference and try and make sense of it for you. But we'll be back in July, and we're also going to Groundswell in July, where I'm sure some of these panel members will be at that. That, of course, is the Regenerative Farming Conference. We've got a big presence there this year, and we've got lots of panels happening over 2-3 days of Groundswell. Tim, I know for definite, is on one of the panels, and you'll be able to watch those panels from Groundswell as well. Fantastic. We had some brilliant conversations there last year, so make sure you follow for those. And a lot of interest in those discussions online as well from that. From the Wildlife Trust stage at Groundswell. Lots more planned over the summer, so do subscribe to our channel and we'll see you soon. And it really just means for me now to say a huge thank you to our brilliant panel tonight that has really, I think, done a great job in answering that question: can community food growing change the world? I think the answer is yes, and it can change you as well. So huge thanks to the panel: Professor Timothy Lang, Pam Warhurst, Shireen Blake, and Dom Taylor. And I think we've also answered that growing carrots on a roundabout really can make a difference as well. Thank you so much tonight for joining us, for all your questions and comments. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.